Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. So let's take a look at what we'll be creating this time. So that's a pretty nice looking effect, I think, and really quite fun to make. Now I have to admit that this is yet another idea that I have stolen wholesale from Andrew Kramer at videocopilot.net. So many brilliant ideas he comes up with, always just a real pleasure to see how he works. As always, I like to see how what he does in After Effects can be transferred to Motion, and this particular one did involve quite a lot of extra reworking of the concept. So I hope this tutorial will be helpful for showing you a few motion specific tricks as well. So let's jump in and get started. I've got a new project here. It's 1920-1080, it's 24 frames a second, and the duration is just 2 seconds long. And first of all, let me zoom out. I'm going to come to the library, Command 2, the generators section. I'm going to add a color solid and a caustics. If I hold down the Command key and select them both, I can just grab them both like that. Okay, I'm going to come to my color solid, F4 for its controls, and I'm going to set the color to black. Next, I'm going to come to my caustics, and I'm just going to set the size here to 0.06. The speed I'll set to 0.75, the refraction to 175, and the brightness I'll leave at 10 for the moment, but we're going to be changing that. I'm going to call this Core. And then my next step is to zoom out just a little bit, select the rectangle mask tool, and what I'm going to do is drag a very thin but really wide mask like that. Let's come to its controls here. Here where it says control points, I want to set all of these Y values down to 0. Because what we'll be doing is using the feather to reveal the caustic. Okay, so we've got a little strip here. If I come to the top of this group, come to the library, filters, and we come to distortion, I'm going to select the polar filter and apply that to that top group. And so the polar is basically adjusting the coordinates of that image, and we end up with this nice circular effect, and you can see the caustic movement there. Then if I grab this mask and we adjust its position, you can see how that effect is going to work. Let me center up the mask there, and let's turn off the polar for just 1 second. Now what's required is a set of keyframes to make this all work. And we could just go into the keyframe editor and set them all individually, but because there are going to be 3 instances of this to build up the complexity, what I want to do is create null objects that I can link to. And the other advantage of that is I can easily adjust the relative strength by how I link to those null objects. So let's come up to the top and create a new group, Command-Shift-N, and let's call it Control. Then I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, that's R on the keyboard, and I'm going to draw out a rectangle and use the reset button to center it up. I'm going to call this Null Brightness, and I'm going to duplicate it, Command D, call this one Null Offset, duplicate it again, Command D, Null Feather, and one more time, Null Position. I can turn off the visibility of this group because these are just control objects, so let's turn that off. Let's come down to the brightness first of all. F1 for its properties. I'm going to use the opacity as a control because that's a handy 0 to 100 slider. So I'm going to come to frame 3 and I'm going to hit an opacity keyframe there. Come to the first frame and set the opacity down to 0. Come to the last frame and again set it down to 0. Now let's just step into the keyframe editor, right click, show in keyframe editor. This last keyframe I'm going to click and select ease in. This keyframe at frame 3 I'm going to select ease out, and I've got that shape. Let's come back to our core caustic and link that up. F4 for the generator controls. Down here where we've got brightness, let me set that to 0. Right click, add parameter behavior, link. I'll drag the null brightness into the image source object well. Source parameter is going to be properties blending opacity, because as you remember we used that as the control object. So now if I hit play, you'll see the brightness shoots up and then gradually fades down, driven by this brightness control. In this instance I want to adjust the scale of that so it doesn't go up to 100%, so I'm going to type a value of 0.4. And that shows you just how easy it is to use those null objects and then just refine the result without having to come back and adjust keyframes. Let me just call that link brightness so everything is nice and tidy. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to animate the null offset. So let's come to the first frame. This time I'm going to use the Y position to control it. So I'm going to select the Y, click on a keyframe, -15, come to the end of the timeline and set a value of 15. If we right click, showing keyframe editor, that's now a straight line. That's perfect. We don't need to get fancy with that one. Okay, so I got a little bit ahead of myself earlier on and I forgot to add one component to this core layer, and that's an offset filter. So let me come to the library, Command 2. I'm going to come to the tiling section and I'm going to select offset and apply that to the core layer. If I hit F3 for the inspector and I adjust the vertical offset, you can see that that's moving the caustic upwards. You might wonder why I'm not using the Y position, but you see that doesn't have the same effect of sliding it within the mask, so that's why I'm using the offset. Let's reset that to 0 and click on it, right click on it, add parameter behavior, link, and we'll link it to the null offset. Source parameter, properties, transform, position, Y. And if I just scrub there, you'll see that's being driven upwards by the offset. And let's rename that link offset. Now we need to address our two remaining nulls, so the null feather, F1 for its properties. Again, I'll be using its blending opacity to drive the animation. So let's come to frame 1. I'll hit a keyframe, set that value to 10. I'll come to the last frame and set a value of 100. Let's come down to the rectangle mask, F4. Let's reset the feather to 0. Right click on it, add parameter behavior, link. Drag the null feather into the source object well. Source parameter, properties, blending, opacity. And we'll set the scale here to 2. And we'll call that link feather. Let's just play that, see how that's working. So the mask opens up using the feather. Finally, we need to animate the null position, so F1 for its properties. Let's come to frame 11 on the timeline. Let's click on the Y position. Let's set a value of -350. let's come to the first frame, set a value of -555. Come to the last frame, and we'll set the value to -175. Then let's open up the keyframe editor. Let's option click on the null position, so we solo that. I'm just going to select this Bezier handle here and just smooth that out like so. Maybe that one as well. There we go. Then we'll come down to the mask, select its Y position, right click, add parameter behavior link, and we'll link that to the null position. Now if we press play, you can see that that's shooting up and then slowing down, just as we want. Let's turn on the polar filter, zoom in. We have our first shockwave. Let's rename this last link position. Now let's make a copy of this core layer. So Command D, and let's call it inner. We can close up the original core. Come to the caustic properties and we'll set the size to 0.05 because I want something a little bit smaller here, and set the refraction to 150, so we've got some nice variation in there. Let's come to its behaviors, F2. I'm going to adjust the offset scale to 1.5, and here the brightness scale set to 1. Then I'll set the mask itself, F2 for its behaviors. I'm just going to make a tiny adjustment to the Y offset in the null position, so -32, and I'll reduce this feather link scale to 1. See how that plays? You can see that I've now got a nice inner ring that's behaving quite differently to the outer ring, just with a few little adjustments to those behaviors. Okay, so let's duplicate this again, Command D, and let's call it outer. F2 for its behaviors, and I just want to reset this vertical offset to 1. I'll select the mask, F2 for its behaviors. This Y position offset I will set to 0, and this feather here I will set the scale to 3.5. Then I just want to come back to the outer caustic generator, F4 for its controls, and I'm going to increase this size here to 0.07, and the refraction I'm going to bring all the way up to 200. So now we've got a nice lot of variation between the three levels. Let's add a filter to the top group, so Command 2 for the library, color correction. I'm going to add a levels. F3 for the inspector, open up the RGB, and I'm going to set a black in of 0.1. And that just crushes down those blacks and gives me a better look. Now, if we zoom in here, you can see that there's a seam where the polar is joining up the two ends of the caustic, and we want to get rid of that. So I want to make a new group in here just above the outer, so Command Shift N, and I'll call it waves. Then I'll take everything, including that color solid, very important to include that, all of that, and drag it inside that group, and I can close that up. Then I'm going to hit K to make a clone of that group, and I'm going to come to the library, Command 2, come back down to tiling, and we're going to add an offset filter and apply that. F3 for the inspector. I'm going to set a horizontal offset of -50, and then I'm going to take the rectangular mask tool and draw a mask like that vertically. I can center it up. F4 for its properties, and let's set a feather of 50, and then I'm going to set the blend mode to subtract. And now if I turn that on and off, let's zoom in a bit so we can see. If I turn that on and off, you'll see that that's taken care of the seam very nicely. Okay, so that's the first part of this tutorial done. What we're going to do is we're going to render this out. So let's hit Command E, and we can settle for standard 422. Next, I'm going to render that out, because in the next step we're going to bring this into a new composition and start doing the fancy stuff. Okay, so I'm in a new composition, and once again I've chosen 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and my 2-second duration. And I've already brought in the render from the previous project. There we go, that's our base layer. Let's first of all color correct this so we can get a feel for how it's all looking. So let's come to the library, Command 2, come to the filters, color correction. I'm going to add a levels. F3 for the inspector. Let's open up the blue, and I want to set the blue black in to 0.25, and I'll open up the red, and I think I'll set the red white in to 0.55. Punch that up a bit. So as far as where we go from here, it's really just a question of playing around and adding lots of different instances of this, and just compositing it in different ways. So I really encourage you to experiment rather than slavishly follow what I show you. So let me first of all duplicate this, Command D, F1 for its properties. I'm going to set the blend mode to screen. Let's just rotate it so we've got a different bit, and let's just scale it up a bit. And let's come to the library, blur, and I'm going to add a zoom blur to that, just to give it a bit more softness. Next I'm going to take my original layer and duplicate that, move it above so it's on the top. I'm going to come to the library, filters, color correction, levels, and F3 for the inspector. Let's really crunch that down so we get some really hot bits, and reduce the blacks. We need to F1 for its blending mode. We need to set this to, let's try linear dodge so it really burns out. Maybe that's too much. Let's try screen again, or maybe add. Let's go with add. And you can see how just building this up, let's rotate that a bit, it starts to get quite interesting. Now I think I want to break this up a little bit because it's all a little bit uniform, this new ring that I've added. So I'm going to make a new group at the top, Command Shift N, Command 2 for the library, generators, and I'm going to add a clouds generator, apply that to that group. F4 to come to its controls, twirl open this gradient, and to bring this white gradient in and the black gradient in, so you get a fairly sharp result like that. Then I'm going to take this latest layer that we've made and add an image mask, so that's Command Shift M, and I'm going to drag the clouds into the mask source well and set the source channel to luminance. And I think you can see that that's sort of now broken it up quite a bit. Let's adjust this clouds a bit so we get a little bit more white. There we go. We could take this layer that we've just made, duplicate it again, F1, let's scale it up a little bit, and again remember to rotate it. You could maybe set a different blend mode for this, something like that. Let's increase the speed of this clouds, because I think that's looking a little bit lifeless there. That's looking quite nice, I think. As I say, I'm really just playing here, and I really encourage you to do the same. Just softening off that gradient so it's not quite so sharp. Okay, let's do another thing. Let's take our base layer again, duplicate it, and let's bring it up to the top. That's Command Shift backwards square bracket, bring it to the top. F1 for its blending mode, and let's set that to screen. Let's come to the library, Command 2, filters, distortion, and let's add a bulge filter like that. F3 for the inspector. Let's set an amount of 400, and let's set a scale of -0.35. And if we solo this layer, Alt clicking on it, Option clicking on it, you can see what that's done. That's created this ring, which looks pretty good. It's like an advanced shockwave. And what I'd like to do is actually duplicate this layer now. So let's bring everything back again. That's Control Shift S, brings all your layers back. Let's duplicate this layer with the bulge on it. Duplicate, Command D, or however you want to do it. Let's rotate it again. Come to the filter. In this instance, let's set a scale of -1. How's that playing? And you see we get those nice double rings. Looks like shockwaves. The only thing about this is it's not quite right at the beginning. It's looking a bit fake, and it's kind of overtaking at the end as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a controlling object. So Command Shift N at the top of the project, and call this fade, I think. And I'll just quickly make an object inside there. R for the rectangle tool. Center that up. Come to the first frame. Set a keyframe of 0. I'll come to frame 11. Set an opacity of 100. Come to frame 30. And set it back down to 0. Then let's look at the keyframe editor. I want to set this last one to be ease in, and this first one to be ease out. Let's call that null. And then let's take this layer here, which is the top bulged layer. Click on its opacity, right click, add parameter behavior link, and we'll link that to the null. And then we'll take that link behavior and Alt or Option drag it to the one below, so that has the same fade on it. So now I'm going to turn off this fade null group because that's not really part of our design. Let's hit F8 just to see it full screen. And that's looking pretty nice for just a few minutes work. And I think the final thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to add some camera shake. So let's add a camera. That's Alt Command C or Option Command C. Switch to 3D. If we come to the camera's properties, F1, and click on its position, right click, add parameter behavior, wriggle. Let's come to the first frame, set a keyframe, 2 pixels, come to the last frame, set it to 0. The apply mode we'll set to add and subtract. We'll turn the frequency up to 10 and the noisiness all the way up to 1. Make sure that's set to transform position XY down here. If we hit F8, do a quick round preview, we're getting that really nice camera judder. So it's been hit by that shockwave. So there you go, quite a few ideas that you can play with and come up with your own version of this. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.